Hi, my name's Tony Carrolls, and this video presentation is 7 screening tips for landlords. We're going to try to do this in 10 minutes or less. So here are the 7 tips we're going to cover. Following federal, state, and local laws, making sure you put everything in writing, authenticating your application form, or I like to call the resume, pull a credit report, understanding the different types of criminal records, gathering references, and don't make it personal. So tip number 1 is you need to follow the laws. And for this video, I'm only going to cover the federal laws. You do need to make yourself aware of any local and state laws that could supersede these, but these are the big ones that govern our industry. And those are the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970, the amended FACTA laws of 2003, the Patriot Act of 2001, and then the Federal Fair Housing Act. So the FCRA law of 1970 was designed to ensure the privacy and accuracy of people's information, and also to require that you have conspicuous disclosure of the information you intend to review and that they sign a consent. You cannot do background checks on a verbal authorization. It is not legally allowed. Then the Fair Credit Reporting Act was amended in 2003 because identity theft became an epidemic in this country. And so as of 2003, you need to now make sure that you protect people's personal information. How do you do that? You need to keep it in a locked file that's in a secure room. Secure room meaning it has a lock on the handle. And when you go to dispose of the information, you need to shred or burn that information. Now, we're also obligated to follow the law of the Patriot Act, and in this Patriot Act, there's one provision that says that anybody who's in the business of conducting a commercial or residential lease needs to ensure that they're not doing business with known terrorist or drug traffickers, and that list is maintained by OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. To search it, you can look at this website that's posted on this slide. It is a manual and labor-intensive search because it is several pages long, it's 7-point font, and it updates itself 3 times a month. So you can't just print this list. You need to go to it live every time you're going to consider an applicant. Otherwise, you should check with your screening vendor and see if that's a service they'll provide for you. Penalties for noncompliance with this law are massive, so you want to make sure that you are paying attention to this and don't expose yourself to what could be $1 million fine and up to 10 years in jail if you intentionally violate this law. Also, there's the Federal Fair Housing Act that's been on the books even longer than the FCRA law, and it deals with making sure that we don't violate people's protected class status. So ensure that you are not creating criteria that does violate these protected classes. Tip number 2 is put your criteria in writing. This is a sample resident selection criteria. It's certainly not the only format that these come in, but it is important that you do put your criteria in writing. The reason for this is that many states have passed laws that require it, especially if you're charging an application fee. If you don't require it, you can be sued for discrimination and required to pay legal costs. Number 3, you need to authenticate that resume. Again, I don't look at these as application forms. I look at them as resumes because folks that are applying for housing are just as likely to fib about their history as people that are applying for a job. And so it is the most important step is to verify the applicant's ID. Make sure that you see a picture, a photograph ID. Best form is a driver's license. If somebody doesn't drive, they should have a state ID card that has all the same information, including the photograph. You can also verify that somebody's using an authentic Social Security card if they're carrying it by looking at this card underneath a magnifying glass, and that signature line that they sign their name on is actually not a bold line. It's actually the word Social Security Administration typed in small lettering. Real cards, you can see that with a magnifying glass. Bogus cards will just print as a solid bold line. Tip number 4, pull a credit report. Why do we do that? Well, the obvious reason is we want to look at somebody's financial payment history, but there's other benefits that are highlighted here in red. The second being it gives us a true and accurate address history. Again, somebody who's just been evicted or skipped on their landlord is not going to put that on their application form, but the credit bureaus do track your address history for us so we can cross-reference that. It also lists any names or aliases somebody's used over the last several years. Lots of folks use aliases, inadvertently even in many cases, myself included. My legal name is Anthony, but I go by Tony. Unfortunately, if I fill out a credit application or an application for housing with you and I don't give you my legal name, you may miss my criminal history. So it's good to have a cross-reference for that. It also tells you about any fraudulent use of the Social Security number, and now one of the credit bureaus actually tracks monthly payment rental histories as well. Tip 5 is understanding criminal records. What I mean here is that there's lots of different ways of gathering criminal information. It's not a one-stop shop. You need to make sure that your criminal investigation includes a sex offender search. You don't want to limit your search just to the local area because people oftentimes move away from their troubles. Know that county-based searches are always more in-depth than any kind of a statewide level repository. And then there's also those crimes prosecuted by federal law enforcement. That would be the Drug Enforcement Agency, the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They don't keep their criminal data in the same place that your local police stores their criminal information. And then if anybody tells you that there's a true bona fide nationwide criminal super search or record search, it's just not true, because in all of these 50 states, not every state has a repository that the counties report their information to. There are nationwide searches, but they're not complete. Again, here's a little more information about those federal criminal searches. Just be aware that these are large criminal cases with an average incarceration period of almost 5 years. Tip 6 is you need to make sure you gather references as you're calling on current and previous rental references. Really, the biggest tip here is to compare those addresses and make sure that all of them that appear on the application are the same as on the credit report. You need to verify that the person you're calling is really a manager and not just a friend. And it's always helpful to seek a reference from one landlord removed, just because a current landlord doesn't have a vested interest in giving a bad reference if they have an applicant they want to move on. If you're going to call for an income verification, just know that you have to speak to a payroll attendant or somebody in the personnel department. Oftentimes applicants put a supervisor's name down on an application form, and you don't want to divulge income to somebody who's not entitled to have that. And then you can also verify the legitimacy of a company by calling your Secretary of State and making sure that the number that you're using is a real employer. Final tip number 7 is don't make it personal. Sometimes you're going to have to deny an applicant, and when you do, you don't want to have you as part of the equation. An applicant's just going to be more upset about the process. So try to avoid saying, "Hey, John Doe, I'm sorry I have to deny your application." Say something to the effect of, based on information from the background report, the application doesn't meet the posted screening criteria. Again, this takes you entirely out of the equation. Also bear in mind that you do not want to hand over a copy of your background report to a denied applicant if you're using a third-party screening agency, because you are then liable for any information that's on there, and you don't want that. And that is our video to conclude. Thank you, and if you need any more information, don't hesitate to give us a call.